I didn't expect anything unusual the night I drove back to my hometown. The sky was a deep gray curtain, heavy with the promise of rain, and the headlights on my car cast long, trembling beams across the old country road that led toward my mother's house. It was late, too late, honestly, for whatever last-minute urgent thing she had insisted I come home for. But when my mother said it was important, she meant it. Or she at least believed she did. The house came into view slowly, the porch light glowing like a tired beacon in the darkness. It felt strange returning here at 32, after years of trying to build a life that didn't constantly pull me backward. The moment I stepped out of the car, the damp summer air wrapped around me like a memory I didn't want. I walked up the porch steps and noticed a pair of shoes by the door, men's shoes. Polished. New. My heart flinched, confused. My mother never had guests this late. And certainly never male guests. A sinking feeling tugged at my stomach. When I opened the door, the smell of rosemary chicken hit me first, my mother's go-to dish whenever she was nervous. I found her pacing in the living room, hands clasped tightly, lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes widened when she saw me. She said she was relieved I made it. That traffic must have been a nightmare. That she had been worried I might not come, not tonight, not with him in the house. I stopped short. Him? Her gaze flicked toward the hallway that led to the den. I heard low, muffled voices, two of them. I asked her who was here. She said it was someone who needed to talk to me. That he had asked for me, specifically. That it was time I finally learned something she had been keeping buried. My pulse jumped. I followed her into the den. Two people stood when I entered, my Aunt Lydia, my mother's older sister, and my ex-boyfriend, Ethan. I froze. Ethan looked almost exactly the same, tall, reserved, with that slight sharpness to his jaw that always made him look like he was holding back words he'd never say. His dark hair was damp, as if he'd walked through rain. When he saw me, he exhaled slowly, like he'd been preparing for this moment for a long time. My Aunt Lydia stepped between us, smoothing her skirt nervously. She said she had insisted he come tonight. That what he had to say affected me more than anyone else. I stared at Ethan, heart racing, mind scrambling. The breakup had been nearly 4 years ago, a long, painful unraveling full of unspoken resentments and the deep loneliness that comes from loving someone who loves you only halfway. We hadn't spoken since. The silence had been the only thing we managed to maintain perfectly. Why was he here now? Before I could ask, he gestured toward the armchair and told me, quietly, that I should sit. His tone wasn't cold. It wasn't distant. It was something else. Something heavier. I sat slowly, because my legs were trembling without my permission. My mother stood behind me. My aunt beside her. Ethan stood across from me. I told them someone had better start talking. My aunt exchanged a glance with Ethan, then said she would begin. She said the truth went back a long time, far longer than my relationship with Ethan, longer than even my mother's marriage to my father. My lungs tightened. She said that there had been reasons, deep, personal reasons, why certain decisions had been made for me when I was younger. That some people had stepped in where others had failed. That some people had taken responsibility in ways I never knew. I felt the room closing in. I asked her what she meant. She said that everything would make sense once Ethan told me his part. He stepped forward, running a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. He said he had struggled with this for years. That the reason he disappeared after our breakup, the reason he never contacted me again, was because he'd learned something that night, something that made continuing our relationship impossible. A cold shiver ran through me. He said he wanted to tell me immediately back then, but my mother had begged him not to. She had told him that revealing the truth in the middle of heartbreak would destroy me. My mother's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. I whispered for him to say it. He took a long, painful breath. Then he told me he had reason to believe that my father wasn't who I thought he was. My vision blurred for a moment. My father, who died when I was 16, had been the quiet center of our family. the steady one. The only one who felt like a safe place. Losing him had gutted me. I asked him what he meant, my voice barely scraping out. He said that he'd discovered documents. Letters. Old photographs. Hidden things that suggested my father hadn't been my biological parent. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. My heart cracked open. I asked Ethan how he could possibly know that. He said he hadn't known for sure, but he had confronted my mother, and she hadn't denied it. Not fully. Not convincingly. My world tilted. But that wasn't the worst part. He said the reason he couldn't stay with me was because he suspected that his father might have been involved. I stared at him, numb. He continued carefully. He said that his father, who had left his own family when Ethan was young, had been in my town frequently during the year I was born. That he'd had connections to my family. That he'd been close to my Aunt Lydia. Too close. My aunt closed her eyes like someone bracing for a blow. I began to shake. But Ethan wasn't done. He said that after our breakup, he searched deeper, not for truth, but for closure, and he discovered something else. His father had been paying someone in my family. Quietly. Secretly. For decades. My Aunt Lydia's face went pale. My mother whispered her name in warning. I asked them both what the hell was going on. My aunt took a step forward, shoulders slumping. She said she needed to confess something before Ethan continued. She said the payments Ethan's father had made had gone to her. Not my mother. Her. My aunt. I stared at her, horrified. She said the payments began before I was even born. She said they were meant to protect me, financially, legally, emotionally. That Ethan's father had wanted to ensure I would have opportunities. That nothing dangerous from the past would reach me. I asked her why Ethan's father would care. The room went dead silent. She said, voice cracking, that when she was young, she and Ethan's father had been more than friends. That the relationship had ended long before I was born, but that something had lingered. A promise. A sense of responsibility. A fear. My mother shook her head sharply, telling her to stop. But my aunt didn't stop. She looked right at me with eyes filled with sorrow. She said that something happened 29 years ago. Something my mother refused to talk about. Something she had spent her whole life trying to bury. She said that the truth wasn't just about who my father was. It was about who might have wanted to be. My throat closed. I looked at Ethan, my pulse racing. He whispered that what he discovered next was the reason he had come tonight. The reason he had insisted we all meet. The reason he had risked reopening everything. He said that his father had disappeared 3 months ago. Vanished. No note. No contact. No trace. My heart pounded painfully. I asked why he was telling me this. He said. Because before he vanished, his father told him something. Something Ethan didn't understand until recently. He told Ethan that the past was coming back. That unfinished business was resurfacing. That I needed to be protected. My skin prickled. Ethan said he didn't know what his father meant at the time, but then, last week, someone broke into his father's storage unit. Someone searching for documents. Photographs. Old letters. Records related to me. I nearly collapsed. My mother finally spoke, her voice a small, shattered whisper. She said there were things she'd kept from me. Things she'd hoped would stay buried forever. Things that had ruined her marriage, things she had spent her life trying to compensate for. She said she was terrified that the past Ethan's father had warned about had finally caught up. Then Ethan walked toward me slowly, as if approaching someone who might break. He said the most shocking part wasn't the payments. Or the disappearance. Or the documents. It was what he found inside one of his father's hidden folders. A photograph. Of my mother. My aunt. And a newborn baby. Me. Held not by my father. Not by my mother. But by his father. My mouth fell open. Everything inside me went silent. But Ethan wasn't finished. He said that written on the back of that photograph was a note. A note in his father's handwriting. My daughter. Keep her safe. The room spun. My body went weightless. My heart forgot how to beat. My mother sobbed. My aunt covered her face. And Ethan stared at me with unbearable apology. Because in a single instant, my past shattered. My identity disintegrated. And the man I once loved had just confessed that the father he had spent his life resenting might be mine. For a few seconds after Ethan said those words, the world went soundless. The ticking clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, even my own breathing, they all faded into a muffled blur. I just sat there, staring at him, trying to process what he had told me. His father. My baby photo in his hands. The words my daughter, keep her safe scrawled on the back. My mother broke first. She let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a gasp and sank onto the sofa like her legs could no longer support her. My Aunt Lydia reached for her, but my mother jerked away, pressing both hands over her face as if she could hide from the truth by refusing to look at any of us. My chest was tight, every breath an effort. I felt like my body was too small to hold what was happening. I asked, or thought I did, my voice was so faint it barely sounded like me, if Ethan was telling me that we might be brother and sister. The words landed in the room like a grenade. Aunt Lydia flinched, my mother shook her head violently, and Ethan stepped back as if he had been the one struck. He said that he did not know for certain. He said that all he had was that photo, that note, and a string of secrets that no one would explain. He said that when he first found out, the possibility had been enough to make him walk away from our relationship without looking back, because he had been terrified of what might be true. My stomach twisted, remembering those last weeks with him. The way he had grown cold, distant, unreachable. The way he had said it wasn't me, it was him. How cliché I had thought he was. I had blamed myself for months, thinking I was too needy, too emotional, too much. All that time, he had been carrying this. I turned to my mother. Her shoulders were shaking. I asked her directly if Ethan's father was my biological father. She shook her head again, the movement jerky, desperate. She said that it was not that simple. That I was looking for a clean answer where there had never been one. That I was trying to force the past into something clear when it had always been a tangle of mistakes and half-truths. That only made me angrier. I told her that simple or not, I deserved to know. I reminded her that the man I had loved might be my half-brother, and that she and my aunt were standing there acting like this was just a complicated story, not a lifetime about to cave in. My aunt told me to lower my voice, to breathe, that the neighbors did not need front-row seats to our family imploding. Her attempt at control made me want to scream. I asked her why she had been taking money from Ethan's father all those years. Why a man who supposedly had no connection to us would send her payments with my name in the memo line. Why she had never told me. She sighed then, an exhausted, broken sound. She said that somebody had to keep things from falling apart when my father died. She said that my mother had gone to pieces, that the bills had piled up, that I had been 16 and numb, and someone had to keep the house running. She said that Ethan's father had owed her. Her use of that word, owed, sent a cold ripple through me. I asked her what exactly he owed her for. She hesitated. Her gaze drifted to my mother. My mother stared at the floor. The space between them filled with something thick and invisible. When my aunt finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. She said that before my parents married, before my mother even met my father, there had been someone else in the picture. A man who moved in and out of this town like a storm. Charming. Persuasive. Unreliable. A man who never stayed long enough to deal with the consequences of his presence. That man had been Ethan's father. I listened, frozen, as she described the early years. She said that he had dated her, not my mother. That he had promised things to her, talked about a possible future. That my mother had warned her not to trust him, that she had been the practical one back then. They had argued about him constantly. Then my aunt said something I didn't expect. She said there had been a pregnancy. Her pregnancy. The room swayed slightly. She said she had found out she was expecting his baby at 23. She had been terrified, but also hopeful in a way she could not explain. She had gone to him, told him, waited for him to say this changes everything. He had said something entirely different. He had told her that it was the wrong time, that his career was just taking off, that he couldn't be tied down, that he would help her financially but could not be a father. He had asked her not to make a scene. Not to ruin what he was building. My throat tightened as I listened. She said that she had almost gone through with the pregnancy. That my mother had stood by her, at first. That they had whispered late at night about baby names and tiny clothes and how their lives would change. Then, she said, something else had happened. My mother had started seeing someone too. A man who was the opposite of Ethan's father. Quiet. Reliable. Kind. My father. The story twisted then. My aunt said that one night, after a particularly bad fight with Ethan's father over the phone, she had come to my mother's house sobbing. She had said she could not do it alone, that she could not face being a single mother while watching her ex chase success in other cities. She said my mother had held her, stroked her hair, told her that she would figure it out. My mother's eyes filled with tears again as my aunt spoke, but she didn't stop her this time. Then my aunt said that the pregnancy had ended. Not by choice. By accident. A fall down a flight of stairs at work. A bad landing. Blood. Hospital corridors and the smell of antiseptic. She lost the baby at 4.5 months. She said she still remembered the emptiness afterward like a physical hole inside her. Ethan looked at his mother's sister with something like shock. He clearly hadn't heard this version of events before. I felt dizzy. I asked what any of this had to do with me. My aunt gave me a tired, sad smile. She said it had everything to do with me. Because after that loss, her relationship with Ethan's father had ended for good. But he hadn't disappeared from their lives entirely. He still came through town for business. He still called sometimes. He still hovered at the edges of their lives like a shadow. Years passed. My aunt said she tried to move on. My mother married my father. I was born. Ethan's father's visits grew less frequent. But he never truly vanished. When my father died, the old storm blew back into town again. My aunt said he had shown up at the funeral. I tried to remember. I vaguely recalled a tall man standing at the back of the church, watching silently. I had assumed he was one of my father's colleagues. Apparently, he wasn't there for my father at all. He had pulled my aunt aside afterward, asked how my mother was coping, asked how I was. He had said that he felt a sense of responsibility. That he knew what it meant for a child to grow up without a consistent father. He had offered money, contacts, help. My aunt had accepted on my mother's behalf, she said. Because my mother could barely stand up straight without crumpling in those weeks. She had signed papers, opened a small account, funneled payments straight into house bills, groceries, school trips. She insisted that it had been practical. Nothing more. I interrupted her, my voice rough. I said she was leaving something out. That none of this explained the words on the back of that photograph. My daughter. Keep her safe. My aunt's hands tightened into fists at her sides. My mother finally looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen. She said that the note was not what it looked like. I asked her how that was even possible. She swallowed and said that after my father died, people had talked. Old rumors resurfaced. Old suspicions. Old questions about timing, about fidelity, about who had been seeing whom in those early years. My father hadn't been a jealous man, but others had been. She said some people had whispered that I didn't look exactly like him. That my hair, my eyes, my cheekbones were suspiciously reminiscent of someone else. Of Ethan's father. My skin prickled with goosebumps. She said she had heard those rumors. She had hated them. She had loved my father. She had believed with her whole heart that I was his. But the whispers had gotten louder after he died. They had kept her up at night. She said that one night, during her deepest grief, Ethan's father had come to see her. He had told her that people in town were talking. That he did not want the child, me, to suffer because of cruel gossip. That if anyone ever questioned my paternity, he would step forward. He would claim me if he had to. He would take responsibility if that kept me safe. She said he had never said that I was his daughter. He had only said he would be willing to be. I tried to absorb that. My aunt added quietly that that was the kind of man he had always been. Unreliable in love, erratic in commitment, but oddly drawn to dramatic gestures of responsibility when it made him feel like a hero. Ethan's mouth tightened. I looked at him, holding back a wave of nausea. I told them all that none of this actually answered the question. I asked again if anyone knew, with certainty, who my biological father was. My mother shook her head slowly. She said that she and my father had gone through a rough patch early in their marriage. She said that there had been a brief separation, during which she had made mistakes she regretted every day of her life. She said that when she discovered she was pregnant, the timelines overlapped just enough to make everything muddy. She said that my father had known this, or at least suspected it. He had chosen to claim me anyway. He had loved me anyway. He had been my father in every way that mattered. But biologically? She said she did not know. Ethan stared at the floor, jaw clenched. I pressed my palms into my knees, trying to steady myself. My thoughts were an avalanche. I had come home thinking my mother might have some news about her health, or maybe a funeral plan for an aging relative. Instead, I was staring down the possibility that the man I once loved deeply might share blood with me. An old memory surfaced, Ethan and I sitting in my tiny city apartment, pizza boxes between us, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare arm. He had told me I was his safest place. The only person who never reminded him of his father, he had said. The irony hit me like a punch. My aunt sat down heavily on the arm of a chair. She said that when Ethan and I started dating, she had panicked privately. She had realized how normal it seemed to everyone else, how coincidental, how sweet, the neighbor's daughter and the troubled son home from the city reconnecting after years apart. She had told my mother that they needed to say something, anything, before we got serious. My mother had refused. She had said that there was no proof that I was related to him. That ruining my first real love over a maybe was cruel. That people fell in love every day with complicated histories, and most of them never had to face something like this. My aunt had backed down. She said she had convinced herself it would be fine. That the odds were small. That Ethan's father probably wasn't my father, just an intrusive ghost from their past. Then Ethan had found the photo. He described it without meeting my eyes. My mother, younger, tired but smiling faintly. My aunt beside her. A baby in the arms of his father. The way his father had looked at the camera with a protective seriousness Ethan had never seen on his face in any of their family photos. He said the note on the back haunted him. The my daughter part. The keep her safe part. He had confronted my aunt with it. She had gone pale, just like tonight. She had admitted that his father had been involved. She had insisted that this did not mean genetically. Ethan hadn't believed her. His own relationship with his father had been built on broken promises and half-truths. Why would this be any different? So he had done the only thing that made sense to him. He had left. He said he had broken up with me to keep me safe. I let out a short, bitter laugh at that. It sounded ugly, flat. I told him that ghosting me after our breakup had not felt like protection. It had felt like abandonment. Just like my father leaving. Just like every man who had ever walked away without giving me a chance to understand why. He winced and said that he knew that now. That he had been a coward. That he had chosen the easier path, disappearing, over the painful one, telling me the truth and watching me crumble. Tears burned at the back of my eyes. I refused to let them fall. I stood up, the fabric of the old armchair creaking under the shift. My legs were unsteady but functional. I said I needed air. Real air. Not this room full of ghosts and secrets. My mother started to say my name, begging me to stay, but I was already walking toward the front door. The house felt smaller than ever, the walls too close, the pictures on the wall staring down at me like witnesses. Outside, the night had deepened. The porch light cast a weak cone of yellow onto the patchy front lawn. A cool breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint smell of rain-soaked soil. I stepped onto the porch and wrapped my arms around myself. The sky was a dark, low ceiling. I stared out at the quiet street, the familiar curve of the sidewalk, the neighboring houses with their warm windows. Lights glowed behind curtains, soft and ordinary. Somewhere, a dog barked. Behind me, the door opened quietly. Soft footsteps approached. Ethan came to stand a few feet away, keeping a respectful distance. He said that he understood if I never wanted to see him again after tonight. He said he hadn't come to claim anything. He had come because his father's disappearance changed everything. I asked him what he meant. He said his father hadn't just vanished. There had been an investigation. A car found near an overlook, empty. A wallet in the glove compartment. No body. No sign of a struggle. Just absence. The police had suspected he might have walked away. Or worse. But then came the break-in at the storage unit. He said that whoever had broken in had been searching specifically for files connected to me. There had been boxes labeled by year, by client, by project. All untouched. Only the box with my mother's last name had been rifled through. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I asked him who he thought was behind it. He admitted that he did not know. He said it could be an old business rival. A family member. Someone from this town who had always known more than they should. Or someone from my father's side of the family, trying to use old secrets as leverage. He said that before his father disappeared, he had changed his will. He had left something to me. I turned to look at him then. His face was half in shadow, half illuminated by the porch light. He looked exhausted, older than he had 4 years ago, the lines around his mouth deeper, his eyes more hollow. I told him I did not want anything from his father. He nodded slowly. He said he understood. But that the world did not always care what we wanted. He said legal things were moving now. Lawyers. Letters. He said that if his father was dead, the estate would have to be dealt with, and my name was on paper in places it had never been before. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the information wash over me. My life in the city, my messy apartment, my demanding boss at the design agency, my coffee-stained sketches, felt a million miles away. Out here, under this dark sky, I was not the woman I had painstakingly built myself into. I was just the girl from this house again. The one whose family and future had always been defined by what other people decided in hushed conversations. The door creaked again. This time it was my Aunt Lydia. She stepped onto the porch with a softness that seemed foreign to her. She had always been the firm one, the one with crisp movements and sharp words. She said that she had something to tell me that my mother never would. Her eyes were shining, not with self-pity but with something like resolve. Ethan took a step back, as if he knew this part wasn't his. I watched her, my shoulders tense. She said that the biggest lie in all of this was not just about who my father might be. It was about who my mother was. My throat went dry. I told her not to play games, not now. She shook her head and said she wasn't. She said she had spent years watching my mother torture herself with guilt over things she could not change, while she herself stayed quiet about the part she played. She said that 29 years ago, when my mother had been going through that rough patch in her marriage, when Ethan's father drifted in and out with his storms and promises, something had happened that none of them had planned for. Another pregnancy. Not my mother's. Hers. Again. I stared at her, stunned. She said the fall down the stairs had not been the end of her ability to conceive after all. That doctors had told her the chances were low, but not impossible. She had never stopped hoping in secret. Then, years later, it had happened again. She had found out she was pregnant shortly after my mother reconciled with my father. My mother had begged her not to tell him. Not yet. Not until she knew for sure whether Peter, my father, wanted more children, whether their marriage would survive. Emotions had been raw. The house had been full of tension. My aunt, torn and confused, had agreed. Then, she said quietly, something had gone wrong with the pregnancy. Not a physical accident this time. An emotional one. She had panicked. She had doubted she could handle raising a child alone. She had reckoned with the knowledge that the father might be a man who had already proven he couldn't be trusted. She had also watched my mother wrestle with infertility at the time, failed attempts, doctor visits, hushed sobbing in the bathroom. She paused, breathing unevenly. Then she looked straight at me and said words that shattered the last piece of solid ground I had left. She said that when the baby was born, she had handed her over to my mother. The world dropped out from under me. The porch seemed to tilt sideways. I grabbed the railing to keep myself from collapsing. My aunt's voice wavered as she continued. She said that my mother had been in the delivery room. That there had been no official paperwork, no formal adoption, just whispered agreements and signatures brushed under other forms. She said they had told the hospital that my mother was the patient, that my aunt was just the helpful sister. My mother had always been so private about my birth story. She had said it had been long and difficult. Now I understood why she had never gone into detail. My aunt said that the plan had been to tell me one day. When I was older. When things were stable. When everyone had stopped living like their pasts were live wires. That day had never come. Every year that passed, it became harder to admit. So they never did. I stared at her, the night air suddenly icy even in summer. My ears were ringing so loudly that I almost did not hear Ethan mutter under his breath in shock. I was 32 years old and had just found out that the woman I called my mother might be my aunt. And the woman I called my aunt might be my mother. I managed to choke out a single question. Who was my biological father? My aunt inhaled shakily. She said that if she had to bet her life on it, she would say it was my uncle by marriage. My father. Not Ethan's. She said the timing lined up more clearly with him than with the man who drifted in and out. She said she had been stupid, entangled, seeking comfort in the wrong arms, but in the end, the man who had been there consistently, the one whose presence aligned with that final conception, had been my father. My father. The man whose soft voice and steady hands I remembered more vividly than anything else from my childhood. The man who had read to me in bed, who had cheered at my school plays, who had called me his girl with such warmth that there was never any doubt in his heart. He had been my father after all. But not in the way I'd thought. Not by marriage. By blood. I pressed my hand to my mouth, suddenly sobbing. Not delicate tears, but full body, shaking sobs that racked my chest. Years of grief for a father I thought I might not be connected to now collided with the shocking, painful relief of knowing that I truly was. He had been mine. I had been his. Not just by choice. By biology. The porch blurred. The trees blurred. The night sky blurred. My aunt reached for me. I pulled away at first, then let her hand rest on my arm, too exhausted to fight. She said that was why Ethan's father had written my daughter on that photograph. Not because he believed I was truly his, but because he had been trying to claim responsibility where he did not fully own it. That had always been his pattern. Dramatic gestures. Hero talk. Limited follow-through. She said that the responsibility he had taken on, in reality, had been financial, legal, situational, but never thoroughly paternal. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, breath hitching. If she was telling the truth, then Ethan and I were not related. Not by blood. Not at all. Our breakup had been a tragic overreaction built on incomplete information and mistrust. He looked at me then, eyes wide, as if he had realized that too in the same moment. But the revelation did not feel like a romantic twist of fate. It felt like a cruel joke. Years of pain. A relationship destroyed. Two people separated by a lie made of fear. And still, one question remained. If my aunt was my biological mother, and my father truly my father, then why had Ethan's father disappeared after saying he needed to protect me? What had driven someone to break into his storage, trying to erase or expose pieces of my past? Who else knew? Who else was invested in this secret? Under the porch light, with the shadows stretching long across the lawn, it dawned on me that the twist was not over. The missing man. The break-in. The altered will. Someone wasn't just trying to hide my history. Someone was trying to cash in on it. And I had no idea who. Yet. For a long moment after my aunt told me the truth, I stood there on the porch holding on to the railing as though it were the only thing keeping me upright. The night wasn't quiet anymore, not to me. I heard every sound at once, the rustling branches, a far-off car passing, my own heartbeat pounding beneath my ribs like a trapped fist. My aunt, my biological mother, stood beside me, her shoulders shaking slightly as if she were holding back years of emotions she never allowed herself to feel. My mother, the woman who raised me, stayed inside behind the screen door, watching us with a mixture of guilt, grief, and a hint of fear. And Ethan stood on the steps, looking like he was witnessing something he never meant to uncover. His face was pale, his hands deep in his pockets, as though he didn't know what to do with them. I asked my aunt, quietly, shakily, why she had told me now. She said she had kept silent for so long because she thought hiding the truth would prevent pain. That once she'd given me to my mother, she had tried to become the aunt, and then the helper, and then the backup parent, but never fully allowed herself to be what she secretly was, my real mother. She said every year that passed made it harder, the lie growing bigger until it felt like a wall between her and me. But then everything changed. I asked her what she meant. She said that a few months earlier, she had received a letter addressed to her house with no return address. Inside was a single sentence typed on plain paper. You can't keep her from the truth forever. It had made her blood run cold. She said she had assumed it was Ethan's father at first, but then he vanished. And when the break-in happened at his storage unit, she knew someone else was involved. Someone who already knew far too much about our family. Someone who had been waiting for this moment. I felt the skin on my arms prickle. I asked her what she thought the person wanted. Her answer came slowly, carefully. She said the person wanted chaos. Wanted leverage. Wanted something valuable that could only be obtained by breaking open old wounds. She said our family still had assets, properties, rights, unresolved estate matters tied to my father's old business deals, and whoever was behind the break-in knew I was the key to unlocking them. My throat tightened. I asked her if she knew who it was. She looked away. That was enough of an answer. Ethan stepped closer then. He said he had something to add, something he had been afraid to say earlier. He said that the box in the storage unit that was broken into wasn't the only thing his father had kept hidden. He said there had been a notebook, almost like a journal, full of names, dates, transactions, bits of information that seemed to map out an entire network of connections. My mother. My aunt. My father. My family business associates. People I barely knew. People whose names Ethan didn't even recognize. He said that one name appeared more often than any other. A name I hadn't thought about in years. My cousin. Adam. My cousin Adam, my aunt's son. A chill washed over me. He was only a year older than me. Quiet. Observant. Always around during holidays but never too involved. He had grown up in the shadow of family chaos and had always seemed harmless. A little sad, maybe. A little overlooked. He had adored my father. He had worshipped him, really. He had stood beside me at my father's funeral with tears streaming down his face, clutching my hand so tightly that his fingers had gone white. Ethan said Adam had been seen near the storage unit days before the break-in. I shook my head slowly, refusing to believe it. My aunt's face turned ashen. I asked her if she knew anything about it. She hesitated for a long time. Then she said something that made my pulse spike. She said Adam had been asking questions recently. About inheritance. About old family agreements. About my father's business ties. About what might happen if certain truths came to light. She said she had assumed he was just curious, that he was struggling financially, that he was thinking of revisiting old family history. But now, she wasn't so sure. My heart pounded in my ears. I told Ethan I needed to see that notebook. That journal. Those notes. He said the notebook was gone. Stolen during the break-in. Adam. But why? The porch light flickered slightly, as if reacting to the intensity of the moment. I felt a wave of nausea. Adam had grown up in a household overshadowed by secrets. A house where my aunt carried grief quietly, where my mother buried her shame, where he watched the adults crumble in different ways. Maybe he had absorbed more of that darkness than any of us realized. I remembered the way he used to stare at me across family dinners, expression unreadable. The way he always asked about my job, my apartment, my plans, never his own. The way he always lingered when conversations turned to the past. Could someone like him have broken into a storage unit? Could someone like him be behind the letter? I wasn't sure. But then another memory hit me, hard. 6 months earlier, during Christmas dinner, Adam had pulled me aside. He had said, very quietly, that our family was more tangled than I knew. That I should be careful who I trusted. That I should question things my mother had told me. He had looked at me with such intensity that I had felt momentarily frightened. Now it made horrifying sense. My aunt suddenly whispered that she needed to level with me, that Adam had been struggling, mentally and emotionally, for years. That he had been in and out of therapy. That he had battled feelings of abandonment and bitterness after losing the father figure he idolized, my father. He had never forgiven my father for dying. And he had never forgiven my aunt for not being stronger. And he had never forgiven my mother for raising me instead of her. The truth settled over me like a weight. I felt faint. My aunt said Adam had always envied me. That he had said things, dark things, when he thought no one was listening. That he had claimed the wrong child got the good life. That he had said he should have been the chosen one, the one taken in, the one lifted into stability and opportunity, not me. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. Ethan whispered that the phrase "keep her safe" might have been a precaution, not for my sake but because someone else was a threat. I asked who. No one answered. Because we all knew. Adam. A sudden sharp knock on the porch railing made us all jump. It was the screen door swinging open. My mother stood there, trembling, holding her phone in one hand. She said she had just received a message. A single text. From an unknown number. She held the phone out toward me with shaking fingers. I took it. One sentence stared back at me. Ask Adam where your real father's journal is. My entire body went cold. I whispered the words aloud. Ethan swore under his breath. My aunt pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. My mother stumbled backward into the house, nearly dropping her phone. I said that this meant Adam was involved. That he was watching. That he knew we were talking tonight. That he had been waiting for this to unravel. Ethan shook his head, trying to think. He said it could be a bluff. A trap. Someone pretending to be him. Someone using his name as bait. But my gut told me the truth. This was him. And this was just the beginning. My aunt stepped closer, gripping my arms. She said there was something else I needed to know. Something she had been hiding out of shame. Something that might explain why Adam had become unhinged. She said that after giving me to my mother, she had spiraled. That she had tried to rebuild herself. That she had eventually fallen into another relationship, unstable, unhealthy, destructive. And that Adam had grown up in that environment. She whispered that Adam always believed she loved me more than him. My breath caught. Loved me, the child she gave away, more than him, the one she kept. And that twisted resentment had grown quietly inside him for years. My aunt's voice cracked as she said she should have told me this earlier. That she should have warned me that Adam was not well. That he had followed my life too closely. That he had collected information he shouldn't have had access to. I felt my stomach hollow out. Ethan stepped between us, protective instinct flaring. He said we needed to call the police. That we needed to secure the house. That this was no longer a family drama, it was a threat. My mother nodded furiously, saying she would lock all the windows, all the doors. She said we could stay the night together, keep watch, stay safe. But something inside me shifted. A deep, unmistakable understanding. I said we didn't need to fear Adam breaking in. Because he already had access. They looked at me, confused. I swallowed hard. Then I said the twist that had been building for years, hiding in plain sight. Adam had been the caretaker for my mother's house for months. He had a key. He came and went freely to mow the lawn, fix the pipes, check the boiler. He had been inside the house dozens of times. He had access to every room. Every drawer. Every secret. And my mother, thinking she was helping a struggling nephew, had paid him generously for it. My aunt staggered back, horrified. My mother whispered that she never imagined. I cut her off. I said Adam didn't just have access to our past. He had access to our present. And just as those words left my mouth, we heard it. A soft floorboard creaking somewhere inside the house. Not outside. Inside. My blood froze. Ethan's eyes widened. My aunt grabbed my arm. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Another creak. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the hallway leading toward the back bedrooms. I whispered my cousin's name. It echoed off the porch like a curse. The next sound we heard was a familiar voice calling out softly from the darkness inside the house. It's time we talked, cousin.